Doing good, thank you. How about you?
I'm very good, ma'am. Thank you for asking. So, for today's session on role of IB in economic development, we have Advocate Rama Iyer with us. Ma'am has been practicing since 1992 and she has an expertise in EDR, IPR, employment and labor laws, and industrial, commercial, and contract disputes. I welcome you, ma'am, for you to have. It's so good to have you with us today. So, ma'am,
Thank you.
whenever we listen about IPR, first thing is why is the need to protect IPR? If it doesn't protect IPR, what is the consequences to it?
Yeah. So, intellectual property rights, or IPRs as we call them, are the legally recognized exclusive rights to creation of the mind. Like any other form of a conventional property, intellectual property can be bought, sold, licensed, or exchanged. So, under IP law, owners are granted certain exclusive rights to a variety of intangible assets,
Hmm.
such as musical, literary, or artistic works, discoveries, inventions, words, phrases, symbols, and designs. These laws protect the legal rights of creators and owners in relation to intellectual creativity, and also their commercialization, rendering, and thereby protection of invention or creativity. So each and every creation requires time, energy, and effort. So intellectual property right has economical value just like any other property. So economic return is the main factor in motivating further development of intellectual property. So intention behind IP protection is to encourage creation by allowing creators to monopolize on their creations for a limited period and providing specific rights to them. It acts as an incentive to encourage further creation, as I told you, and innovation among individuals. Thus, IP rights are granted in the larger interest of society's need to foster development and innovation.
Right, ma'am. So, as you mentioned that it is for the benefit of economy itself. So, what are the economic benefits to IPR?
Yes. So, for any business to be a cut above the rest, the development is very important. Development, it clears the way for making of licensed innovation, and utilizing this protected invention, it gives a business a serious edge while additionally contributing to its prosperity.
Right.
So, protected innovation is an important asset for all businesses, especially those which invest hugely towards R&D, that is research and development, in order to create use and services,
Right.
just technology brands, although such brands are often the biggest newsmakers.
Correct.
IP rights are directly related to competition. They help promote and maintain healthy competition. So business success largely depends upon protection of its intellectual property,
Hmm.
which is a major source of its revenue and a business asset. For instance, a company's patent portfolio could increase the value of the company as a whole during sale or acquisition. By excluding others from such information and monopolizing it, a company gains leverage over others, and this requires a company to maintain and also grow its IPRs.
Right, ma'am. So, ma'am, as you mentioned about the companies and the utilization of IPR, so, ma'am, how should company utilize intellectual property system to develop the business or increase their economic activity?
Intellectual property rights, as I mentioned earlier, they include trademarks, copyrights, designs, patents, and various other things like that.
Litigation, yeah.
While most large businesses have created and maintained and they also maintain enforcement on a large intellectual property portfolio. Many small or medium sized enterprises wait too long into their development to get serious about intellectual property protection. So,
Right.
if you want to be proactive with intellectual property in the early stages of your business, then protection alone can cost a lot of money in
Right.
dealing with lawyers specialized in the specific expertise, I mean, in that space.
Hmm.
So, regarding trademarks, companies should conduct searches to determine if the proposed trademark is available for use and protection. Searches on even Google or the registry database can initially be conducted to determine if confusingly similar common law trademarks and or federal, I mean, or trademarks which are already registered, they exist, followed by comprehensive searches by third party. You can engage somebody to conduct a search. If the search results present low risk, then applications can be filed to check if such trademark are available. The process for patents is also similar. And if the commercial information is not patentable but has economic value, a company should consider keeping it a trade secret. Trade secrets are quite cheap and, in principle, they do not expire but can easily be lost. Thus, information must be strictly guarded in secrecy to be considered a trade secret. And the protection of intellectual property rights is definitely very important for the economy and its future growth. Companies form part of how economy grows, and so it is very much important that the companies guard the IPRs to ensure that the economy itself grows.
Right, ma'am. Right. So, ma'am, as we are talking about the benefits of IPR, do you think there are any drawbacks of IPR on the economic development?
Uh, Arguably, the drawbacks of IPR on economic development are lesser compared to the advantages, definitely. The biggest drawback of IPR registration is that it sometimes restricts the technology to be used in the best possible way. So a person who is holding rights sometimes misuse uh, their rights, and they also can charge according to their will. And because of protection under IPR, that innovation cannot be used by the competitors. So competition is the most important factor for the development of any economy. As I mentioned that IPR also fosters competition. It can also be a bar for competition because the spirit of competition that keeps checks and balance in place. And because of the registration of the IP protect company, it might stop the competitors from venturing into that area. So even it might have some effect on the price as well as quality of the product. But IPR laws, it is said, are against the principle of competition. And another of the arguments that may be raised is that IP is a result as well as a tool of promotion of capitalism. This
Right.
argument is based on the fact that IP promotes competition and, as I told, it acts as a barrier to enter a market. It is not very intuitive argument, though, because the intention of IP rights is quite the opposite. It is to allow more people to create and enjoy the benefits of their creation. And another concern is the potential for IPRs to support monopoly pricing. The provision of product patents in pharmaceuticals, agricultural chemicals, and the biotechnology, and also with plant breeders' rights, that should confer greater market power on rights holders. So there is evidence that patents generate considerably higher prices for protected drugs than for copied and generic drugs. IPR laws, they create a monopoly in the market
Hmm.
naturally, because law like copyright, trademark, and patents are creating barriers for the competitor to use the innovation. Competition makes sure that producer must think about the benefit and satisfaction of the consumer, because if the consumer is not satisfied, then he or she can shift to another competitor in the market. That is also not possible when there is a IPR restriction on others to enter it. But this law does not apply when there is a monopoly in the market. No, they can't shift to somebody, some other vendor. Sorry. The consumer will get no other options and will have to buy the product at the price determined by the producer. Due to the competition, the producer is forced to charge not much than the more marginal cost if there is no right and restriction on use of the IPR.
Great. As you mentioned about drawbacks, I want to ask you that because I have heard that registration of IPR is very expensive. So, do you think that this is also a drawback for the economic development that many people do not even register their
That
ideas?
Yes, that is also one of the reasons, as I would say, because not everyone is aware of registration, and registration of patent is not very easy. It goes through a cumbersome process, so that also is one of the reasons. But then, copyright registration as such is not required, because a person who creates a copyrightable right, that itself, copyrightable work, that has intrinsic copyright, so that particular work or creation need not be registered. So it depends on what rights we are talking about. Trademark registration is not as expensive as patent. So yeah, it depends on that.
Right. And ma'am, you have been in this industry for so long. How many infringement cases have you seen? Like, how do you deal in these cases, and what sort
Sorry,
of
what infringement?
yeah, I was asking ma'am,
No.
like
Mm.
you must have seen many cases related to infringement. So how do you deal in that, and what uh, solution does the person wants when another person infringes his right?
So it is most important first is to register your intellectual property right, because
Mhm.
it is your property and it is the creation out of your intellect. So it is most important to register the IPR, and second, to renew it, because trademark, for instance, is given for a specific period, and all IPRs are given for a specific time frame. So you
Right.
have to see whether, if it is a trademark, you have to renew your registration. Second and third, be vigilant. Be vigilant that there is no infringement of your trademark by anyone else. So
Hmm.
these three are very important, because sometimes your the conventional property that you have, that is, it may be your property, that very much important that you are vigilant and aware that your property is protected and nobody uses your property, one, and second, if it is something like trademark, that nobody uses anything that is even similar or can cause some kind of confusion in the mind of others, because after that, going to court and then see, that is an option we have exercised many a times, and we have defended also
Hmm.
certain cases for infringement of IPRs. But that should be later. You should try to avoid going into litigation, but then you should not hesitate from jumping in, because after use of trademark or your IPRs, whatever, for some time, you may not be able to challenge it. So you have to be very vigilant and ensure that you protect your IPRs at any cost.
Correct, ma'am. So, ma'am, while discussing about protection of IPR and economic growth, do you think that intellectual property rights are relevant for economic growth?
For economic growth, yes, definitely, because it the protection of intellectual property rights is very important for the economy and its further growth, because with increase in research and development and advance of the knowledge economy, because more and more of the value that firms and the overall economy achieve will come from highly value added intangibles, including IP in inventions, brands, and works. So, in many companies, even now, 80% or more of their market value is attributable to intangibles, and that is mainly the intellectual property rights.
Right.
So, in some small companies, the only value that the company would have will be the intellectual property that they own in maybe a very exciting new innovation that they have developed. So they may not have anything else apart from that. So IPR has truly become an intellectual currency, helping to promote economic growth and a company's competitiveness and innovation worldwide. And IP, I would say, does have a direct impact upon economic growth, as higher levels of IP protection have shown that there is an increase in technology and development in any country. So, countries with stringent IP protection have shown greater and higher GDP, while developing countries which have weaker protection regimes are a little slow in the economy. And as a result of this, the developing countries are less likely to receive new and more advanced technology from developed countries because they are wary about the protection their IPRs may have. So the resultant huge gap in development leads to migration from economies where protection is lax to those economies which have stricter IP laws in place,
Hmm.
that is, in search of opportunities.
Right, ma'am. And as you mentioned intellectual currencies, can you please explain a bit about intellectual currencies?
Intellectual currency, well, that is the way in which, see, when any intellectual property rights are concerned, what happens is you monetize that. When you are able to monetize that, that equates to the intellectual currency that any company will have or any economy will have.
Okay. And this this thought made me come up with one more question that as you mentioned that copyright law and trademark law are for the benefit of people only. So do you think that the copyright law applies to respect and integrity as mentioned in the Copyright Act for the authorship of the on the internet?
Yes. Copyright is a form of intellectual property protection which is granted under law to the
Hmm.
creators of original works of authorship, such as literary work. It can also include computer programs, tables, compilations, and computer database. It could be codes, schemes, or in any. And it also includes the dramatic, musical, and artistic works or cinematographic films and sound recordings. So these are the intellectual property of those creators. And under the Copyright Act, the author is given economic as well as moral rights over that. So, economic rights basically allow the author to enjoy the financial gains he receives through the use of his work. So, moral rights serve the purpose of preserving the work and protecting the author's identity as the creator of the work.
Hmm.
So, under the Indian Copyright Act, the two basic moral rights, one of paternity. Paternity is to be known as the creator of the work, and integrity. Integrity is to ensure that there is no distortion or mutilation of the work. So, copyright protection is conferred on all original work,
Hmm.
and original means that the work has not been copied from any other source, and it commences from the time the work is created. And the registration, as I mentioned earlier, is optional and is not required. I mean, it's not mandatory. And copyright registration does not confer any extra right merely because it is merely a proof of entry in respect of the work in the copyright register maintained in the registrar of copyrights. So the effects of digitization can be seen in copyright regime. So there also it is very important to ensure that the person whoever owns the copyright is very vigilant,
Hmm.
because internet is undoubtedly the easiest way to retrieve and disseminate information, and
Right.
this is where the problem also begins.
Hmm. Right. So with every positive thing, a negative
Yeah.
comes there. So it
Yes.
is a thing. So, ma'am, I have studied somewhere that we have came with an agreement known as TRIPS agreement. So how has the that agreement impacted on Indian economic growth?
Okay. So earlier, we did not have this strict intellectual property rights regime. The
Hmm.
agreement on TRIPS, that is trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, it is a multilateral minimum standards agreement between members of World Trade Organization. So the agreement lays down minimum standards of IP protection, which need to be incorporated within the national laws. The obligations under the TRIPS agreement have had the effect of harmonizing as well as strengthening the IP protection within any country. So, as a result of the TRIPS agreement, product patent regime for especially the pharmaceutical products was introduced in India. So, as a result of this, it was seen that the number of patent applications in India drastically reduced and drastically increased, and it also acted as an incentive for multinational companies to come into the Indian market and conduct R&D activities, which in turn directly contributed to the economy. So
Hmm.
India went from having a pharmaceutical industry worth 6 billion to 30 billions as soon as the TRIPS agreement was entered into. And 2020, it was expected to be 60 billion, but that has still not come up $60 billion.
Hmm.
The pharmaceutical companies of India are the third largest in the world, owing to the production of generic drugs at very cheap rates, and also exporting these drugs to many countries, mainly to Africa, Latin America, and other Asian countries,
Hmm.
because the cost of production in India is quite low compared to US and Europe. And according to the report of World Intellectual Property Organization,
Hmm.
pharmaceutical patent application is the second largest subject matter in India.
Right. So, ma'am, apart from TRIPS agreement, we must have entered into many other agreements. What are those, if you can explain? Ma'am, am I audible? Ma'am?